Elijah Grant sat at the head of the long conference table, arms crossed, frustration tightening his jaw. The latest customer service reports were spread out in front of him, and they weren't good. Complaints about long wait times, rude employees, and even price gouging had piled up over the last few months. His father had built this auto shop chain from the ground up, and when he passed it down to Elijah, he expected him to uphold its reputation. But now, it seemed like the very foundation of the business was cracking. "I don't understand," Elijah muttered, shaking his head. "We used to pride ourselves on fair pricing and honest work. What's changed?" His district manager, a man named Derek, cleared his throat. "It's probably just a few bad apples. Most of our stores are running fine." "That's not good enough," Elijah shot back. "I'm not going to sit here and take your word for it. I need to see it for myself." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "You're the CEO. If you walk into any of the shops, they're going to be on their best behavior." Elijah leaned forward. "Then they won't know it's me." The room went silent. Elijah wasn't the kind of CEO who sat behind a desk all day, but he also wasn't involved in the day-to-day operations of each shop. With 5 locations across the state, most of the employees had never even met him in person. They saw his name on their paychecks, but that was about it. 2 days later, Elijah stood in front of one of his auto shops, dressed in worn-out jeans and a faded hoodie. His black hair was dyed a lighter brown and a well-trimmed beard covered his usually clean-shaven face. He wore thick-rimmed glasses and a name tag that read Eli. He had signed himself up as a trainee under the shop's manager, a man named Frank. Frank had been with the company for over 10 years. Elijah hoped he was running the place properly, but the reports suggested otherwise. Stepping inside, Elijah immediately noticed the tension. The front desk worker, a tired-looking woman in her 20s, barely glanced up from her phone. A customer stood at the counter, arms crossed, looking frustrated. "I've been waiting for 30 minutes just to get a tire checked," the man said. "Is it always this slow?" The woman sighed and finally put her phone down. "We're short-staffed," she muttered. "You'll have to wait." Elijah's stomach twisted. Short-staffed? That was news to him. He had approved new hires just last month. A loud voice cut through the shop. "Eli, get over here." Elijah turned to see Frank waving him toward the garage. He walked over quickly, keeping his head down. "You're the new trainee?" Frank asked, eyeing him up and down. "That's me," Elijah said. Frank snorted. "You don't look like you know a wrench from a screwdriver. Let's hope you're a fast learner." Elijah bit back a retort. He needed to see how this place really ran, not get into an argument on day one. For the next few hours, Elijah worked alongside the mechanics, changing oil, rotating tires, and observing everything. Some of the workers were efficient, but others dragged their feet, taking extra smoke breaks and cutting corners on repairs. Then there was Mason, a young trainee barely out of high school. He worked hard, asked questions, and actually seemed to care about the customers. Elijah took note. Around midday, a minivan pulled up to the shop. A woman in her 30s stepped out, holding a crying toddler on her hip while 2 other kids sat in the back seat. Her face was tight with stress. "Excuse me," she called out. "Our car broke down a few blocks away. My husband's at work and I don't have any way to get home. Can someone help?" Frank barely glanced up. "You'll have to wait. We're busy." Elijah clenched his fists, but before he could say anything, Mason stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'll check it out," Mason said, wiping his hands on a rag. Frank scowled. "Mason, we've got paying customers ahead of her. Don't waste time." Mason hesitated but then squared his shoulders. "I'll be quick." Elijah watched as Mason grabbed a toolbox and followed the woman outside. His heart pounded. This was the kind of employee his father had always valued, someone who did the right thing, even when no one was watching. Elijah followed at a distance, pretending to grab something from the supply shelf, but really he wanted to see what Mason would do. The woman's van was old, the kind that had seen years of road trips and school runs. Mason popped the hood and inspected it. "Looks like your battery's dead," he said. "I can jump it for you, but you'll need a new one soon." The woman sighed in relief. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if I had to wait for a tow." Mason nodded and quickly got to work. Within minutes, the van roared back to life. Elijah expected Mason to charge her something, but instead, he just smiled. "You're good to go. No charge." The woman's eyes welled up. "Are you sure?" Mason shrugged. "It was just a jump start. No big deal." Elijah felt something stir in his chest. This kid had a good heart. But when Mason walked back into the shop, Frank was waiting. What the hell was that? Frank snapped. You think we're running a charity? That woman could have paid for a tow or a battery replacement. Mason stiffened. She had 3 kids, Frank. It was just a jump start. I don't care, Frank shot back. Next time you charge. Got it. Elijah had seen enough. His jaw tightened as he turned to walk back inside. Mason was the kind of worker this company needed. Frank, on the other hand, might be part of the problem. And Elijah was about to find out just how deep that problem ran. Elijah's pulse was steady, but his mind was racing. The way Frank dismissed Mason's act of kindness unsettled him. His father had built this company on integrity, yet here was a manager prioritizing short-term profit over decency. Elijah needed to see more before making any decisions, so he forced himself to stay quiet for now. The shop stayed busy throughout the afternoon, and Elijah blended in, taking mental notes. The mechanics worked at different paces, some efficient, others distracted. One employee took twice as long to complete a routine brake job, constantly stepping away to chat with another worker. A couple of cars sat unattended for nearly an hour while employees scrolled through their phones. Then there was the pricing issue. Elijah overheard a conversation between a customer and the front desk worker. The man had come in for a basic oil change but was now being told he needed a full engine flush, something that wasn't necessary unless a vehicle had severe buildup. The customer hesitated, asking if it was really needed. The front desk worker, without any real explanation, insisted it was. Elijah tightened his grip on the wrench in his hand. This was exactly the kind of upselling that had appeared in the customer complaints. Unnecessary services being pushed on unsuspecting customers, all while the actual service times dragged on. As the day wore on, he noticed that Mason wasn't just hardworking, he was also knowledgeable. When an older man came in complaining about a rattling noise, Mason diagnosed the problem in minutes. He explained it clearly without exaggerating the severity and even suggested a cheaper fix than what was listed on the service sheet. Frank overheard and quickly intervened, overriding Mason's suggestion and insisting on a more expensive repair. Elijah watched the customer shift uncomfortably before reluctantly agreeing. That was the moment Elijah knew this wasn't just inefficiency, this was a culture problem. Employees followed the wrong example, cutting corners where they could and pushing unnecessary work on customers. By the time the shop was closing, Elijah had seen enough. He lingered near the break room, waiting for Mason to finish cleaning up. When the younger man finally set down his tools and headed toward the back, Elijah followed. Mason grabbed an old duffel bag from a locker, his posture sagging with exhaustion. Elijah spoke up, keeping his voice casual. He needed Mason to talk freely. "You always work this late?" Mason glanced over, surprised, then shrugged. "Yeah. Someone's gotta clean up." Elijah leaned against the doorway. "You don't seem like the type to push unnecessary repairs. That ever get you in trouble?" Mason exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just try to do what's right for the customer. But around here, that doesn't always go over well." Elijah studied him. "Why stay?" Mason hesitated, then gave a small, tired smile. "Because I actually like fixing cars. And not everyone here is bad. You know? Some of the guys just follow orders." Elijah nodded slowly. He respected that. Before he could say anything else, Frank's voice echoed from the garage. "Eli, you still here? Quit wasting time and clock out." Elijah gave Mason a knowing look before heading out. The moment he stepped outside, he pulled out his phone and called Derek. "Tomorrow I want you at the shop. No excuses." Derek hesitated. "Is something wrong?" "Just be there," Elijah said. He wasn't about to let his father's legacy crumble under mismanagement. And tomorrow, Frank was going to learn exactly who he had been brushing off all day. Elijah arrived early the next morning, stepping into the shop just as the first customers pulled into the lot. The familiar scent of motor oil and rubber filled the air. But now, it carried a weight he hadn't felt before. He knew what had to be done today. Mason was already at work, rolling a tire toward one of the lifts, while the rest of the crew moved at their usual sluggish pace. Frank stood near the front, coffee in hand, chatting with one of the mechanics. He didn't even acknowledge Elijah as he walked by. A few minutes later, Derek arrived. He stepped inside, glancing around the shop with careful curiosity. His pressed polo shirt and spotless shoes stood out in the grease-streaked environment. Elijah didn't approach him right away. He wanted Derek to see things for himself. Elijah got to work, blending into the routine. He assisted with minor tasks, keeping his ears open. Another customer came in asking for a basic inspection, and once again, unnecessary repairs were pushed. A woman brought her car in for a battery test only to be told she needed a full replacement, something Elijah knew was unnecessary. By mid-morning, Frank finally noticed Derek lingering near the front. He set his coffee down and walked over, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to forced professionalism. Derek asked a few questions, keeping his tone neutral. Frank answered smoothly, but Elijah could tell he was holding back details. Then a man in his 50s walked in, frustration clear on his face. He carried a crumpled receipt in his hand. He asked why he had been charged nearly triple the expected amount for a repair the day before. The front desk worker hesitated, glancing toward Frank. Frank barely looked up. He waved a hand dismissively, saying the work had been necessary. The man's voice tightened. He had only come in for a brake pad replacement, yet the shop had added additional services without his approval. Elijah took a step forward, but Mason beat him to it. He pulled up the man's service records on the computer. His brows furrowed as he read through the details, then he turned to Frank, his voice steady but firm. The man's car hadn't needed the extra work. The brake rotors had been in good condition, meaning the extra charges weren't justified. Frank's jaw tensed. He shot Mason a hard look and told him to stay out of it. Elijah glanced at Derek, who was watching the exchange with mounting concern. The customer wasn't backing down. He wanted an explanation. Frank's patience snapped. His tone turned sharp as he told the man that if he had a problem, he could take it up with corporate. That was the breaking point. Elijah stepped forward, his posture straightening as he pulled off his name tag. He called Frank's name, and for the first time, Frank actually looked at him. Elijah's voice carried through the shop as he introduced himself, his real name, his real position. For a split second, the entire shop froze. Frank's face went pale. The front desk worker's eyes widened. A few mechanics exchanged nervous glances. Elijah turned to the customer and apologized, assuring him that the charges would be corrected immediately. Then he faced Frank again. He asked how long this had been going on. How long had customers been overcharged? How many unnecessary repairs had been pushed? Frank stumbled over his words, trying to downplay it. Elijah didn't let him. He pointed out everything he had witnessed. The unnecessary upsells, the slow service, the way employees ignored customers in need. Frank shifted uncomfortably, casting a glance toward Derek, but Derek only crossed his arms. Mason stood nearby, silent but watching intently. Elijah took a deep breath and made it clear this wasn't just about one shop. It was about the culture Frank had created. And it wasn't going to continue. Frank tried to argue, claiming he had increased revenue, that he was just following business strategy. Elijah cut him off. Revenue meant nothing if the company's reputation was crumbling. Then Elijah did what had to be done. He told Frank he was done here. Effective immediately. The shop was dead silent. Frank's face twisted in disbelief, but Elijah didn't waver. Frank muttered something under his breath, grabbed his things, and walked out. Elijah turned to the rest of the crew. He told them things were going to change. The dishonest practices were over. Customers would be treated with respect, and employees who actually cared like Mason would be recognized. Mason looked stunned. He hadn't expected to be singled out, but Elijah made sure he knew his actions hadn't gone unnoticed. Elijah wasn't just here to clean up a mess. He was here to rebuild the company his father had trusted him with. And this was just the beginning. With Frank gone, the shop felt different. Employees lingered in uneasy silence, uncertain about what would happen next. Elijah let the weight of the moment settle before addressing the group. He wasn't here to intimidate them, he wanted to rebuild trust. He made it clear that changes were coming, not just in leadership but in the way the shop operated. Dishonest sales tactics were over. Customer service had to improve. Employees who worked hard would be recognized, while those who took advantage of the system would be held accountable. Derek, standing nearby, listened without interrupting. His silence told Elijah all he needed to know. He had turned a blind eye to these issues for too long. That would change, too. Instead of making immediate staffing decisions, Elijah spent the rest of the day observing how the team functioned without Frank's influence. Some employees looked relieved, while others seemed nervous. The front desk worker, who had followed Frank's lead in pushing unnecessary repairs, avoided eye contact. A mechanic who had been sluggish earlier in the day suddenly worked with more focus. Mason, however, remained consistent. He assisted customers with patience, explained repairs without exaggeration, and even helped a new trainee struggling with a diagnostic tool. Elijah made a mental note this was the kind of employee the company needed more of. Later, Elijah and Derek retreated to the office. Stacks of invoices and service records sat on the desk, and Elijah wasted no time digging into them. He searched for patterns, overcharges, questionable repairs, anything that indicated how deep the problem ran. Derek, now fully aware of the severity of the situation, helped comb through the documents. They found more than they expected. Frank had approved unnecessary services on dozens of vehicles over the past year. Certain customers, particularly those who seemed less knowledgeable about cars, had been targeted for excessive upsells. Some employees had followed his orders without question, while others had quietly objected but never escalated their concerns. Elijah wasn't just frustrated, he was disappointed. His father had built this company on integrity, yet somewhere along the way that had been lost. By evening, Elijah had a plan. The next morning, he gathered the staff before the shop opened. He addressed the elephant in the room. Trust had been broken, and it wouldn't be repaired overnight. But he wasn't here to punish everyone for one man's mistakes. He was here to fix the culture. He announced immediate policy changes. No more unnecessary upsells. Every repair recommendation needed to be justified with clear evidence. Customers would be given honest assessments, not pressured into spending money they didn't need to. He also made personnel decisions. The front desk worker who had pushed dishonest sales tactics without hesitation was reassigned to another role where they wouldn't interact with customers. Some employees who had taken advantage of Frank's leadership were put on notice: either improve or leave. Then he turned to Mason. In front of everyone, he acknowledged Mason's integrity and work ethic. He offered him a promotion not just in title but in responsibility. Mason would help lead training for new employees, ensuring they learned the right way to treat customers. Mason's eyes widened in surprise, but he nodded, accepting the role. Over the next few weeks, the shop transformed. Customers noticed the difference: wait times improved, service became more transparent, and employees who once seemed disengaged now took pride in their work. The company's reputation, once at risk, slowly began to rebuild. Elijah stayed involved, checking in regularly. He wouldn't make the mistake of assuming things were fine just because reports looked good on paper. He had learned firsthand that the only way to truly understand a business was to experience it from the ground level. One afternoon, as he prepared to leave the shop, Mason approached him. He thanked Elijah not just for the promotion but for noticing the people who actually cared. Elijah shook his hand, knowing that this wasn't just about fixing one shop. It was about ensuring that the company his father had built remained true to its values. And he wouldn't let that slip away again. Elijah returned to the shop the following week, determined to ensure the changes were sticking. He had seen too many companies implement reforms only for old habits to creep back in once the initial pressure faded. That wasn't going to happen here. As he stepped inside, the atmosphere felt different. It wasn't just that Frank was gone, the entire energy of the shop had shifted. Employees moved with more purpose, customers were being greeted properly, and there was no sign of the aggressive upselling that had once plagued the place. Mason was at the front desk, explaining a repair estimate to an older woman. Instead of rushing through it, he walked her through each line item, making sure she understood why each service was recommended. She nodded thoughtfully, then thanked him, clearly appreciating the honesty. Elijah watched for a moment before heading into the garage. The workstations were more organized than before, and mechanics weren't idling unnecessarily. Instead of taking extended breaks, they were focused on their tasks. A few of them even exchanged ideas on how to complete jobs more efficiently. One mechanic, a man named Luis, was training a new hire on brake replacements. Before, training had been rushed or ignored altogether, but now there was an effort to do things properly. The new hire asked questions, and Luis took the time to answer. Elijah approached Derek, who had been overseeing the transition. They stepped into the office, where stacks of updated service logs sat on the desk. Derek had been reviewing them, cross-checking estimates against actual repairs. Derek admitted that he had overlooked a lot before. He had assumed that since the shop was profitable, things were running smoothly. But profit without integrity was unsustainable, and now he could see that clearly. Elijah told him that moving forward, every manager in the company would be held to a higher standard. It wasn't enough to hit revenue targets, they had to ensure customers were treated fairly. Derek agreed and mentioned that he had already started reviewing practices at the other locations. Later that day, Elijah met with the full staff. He addressed the changes they had made and the progress he had seen, but he also made it clear that this wasn't a temporary fix. The company's reputation had taken a hit and it would take time to rebuild trust with customers. Mason brought up an idea offering free vehicle checkups for returning customers who had been overcharged under Frank's management. It would be a way to show them that the company was serious about making things right. Elijah approved the idea immediately. He had already begun refunding those who had been wrongfully charged, but this would add another layer of accountability. Before leaving, Elijah took a final walk through the shop. As he passed by Mason, he stopped and told him that his promotion wasn't just about a title. He expected Mason to be a leader to help set the standard for how things should be done. Mason nodded, understanding the responsibility that came with it. Elijah left the shop that evening knowing that the work wasn't finished, but real progress had been made. The company was getting back to what it was meant to be: honest, hardworking, and customer-focused. And he would make sure it stayed that way.